Well, there's no prizes for guessing what sort of rifle's sitting behind me here. This is the Weihrauch HW97K with the black synthetic thumbhole stock. Now, I've been running this rifle for a wee while now, and there's no denying it's a very accurate rifle, as I've shot a lot of crows, magpies, jackdaws, wood pigeons, rabbits, and even a couple of rats with it. Now, I originally bought this to have a wee bit of a change compared to the usual PCP air rifles that I shot, but I noticed on my channel that some people suggested getting the rifle tuned. Well, I was quite happy with the way the rifle shot straight out of the box, but lately I noticed a change in the rifle. It's a wee bit hard to explain, but I fired it over the corner graph, and as you'll see with the footage coming up, there was a reduction in power. Now, as of yet, I didn't know what the problem was, but I thought it was a good time to look into getting the rifle tuned. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, why didn't I send it to this gunsmith or that gunsmith? Well, the problem was, here in Northern Ireland, there isn't really any airgun tuners. So that means the gun would have to be sent over to a gunsmith in England using a specialist courier, which sometimes can cost as much, if not more, than the price of the work done to the rifle. So, being a bit stingy, I decided on option B, which was to order a tuning kit and fit it myself. Now, there's various tuning kits on the market, but the one that stood out to me, and the one I bought after a wee bit of research, was the V-Mach tuning kit. Now, it's probably one of the dearest on the market, but it seems to get some very good reviews, so we'll see if it solves the problem. So keep tuned and see how I get on. So the first thing I wanted to do was to fire a few shots over the corner graph so I can see what the rifle's present power is. Then we'll have something to compare it to later on after we fitted the tuning kit to it. So, with our 5 shots, we've got an average of 634 feet per second, and using a 10.5 grain Bisley Magnum, that works out at 9.3 foot-pounds of energy, so we definitely are a wee bit on the low side. So, before we start, let's see what we get for our money with the V-Mach tuning kit. I'll get it right yet. You can see the packaging is clearly marked for the different manufacturers, rifle models, calibers, power rating, and even whether or not it was designed for a 25 or a 26mm cylinder for the HW97. Once you've removed the packaging, you can see there's 2 plastic bags, the smaller of which holds the instruction leaflet, a small bottle of oil, and a tub of grease. In the larger bag, you'll find the main spring, the spring guide, and the breech sleeve, all in one piece. In the bottom of the bag, you'll find the breech seal, some compression washers, and a small black Delrin spacer. The fitting instructions come printed in a single piece of A4 paper, stating the make and model it's designed for, the contents of the packaging, a disclaimer, as well as the fitting instructions themselves, which I'll try and follow as best as possible. Step 1 in the instructions, of course, is to check that the rifle is uncocked and unloaded, which I did before I started off camera. Then, if you have a scope fitted, you're going to have to remove it, which you can simply enough do with the Allen keys that were supplied with the mounting system you're using. Step 2 is to remove the stock and the trigger guard. Now be careful of the 4 end screws, as they have a couple of washers in behind them that can easily get lost. Now, Weihrauch usually fit slot-headed screws to their rifles, so please try and find a screwdriver that fits these slots as best as possible, otherwise you'll chew the screws up. There's the other little fella there. Next we need to take the large screw out in front of the trigger guard. Then the smaller one at the back. And remove the trigger guard. Now the stock should simply slip off. It's a good idea if you keep a tub beside you to put all the screws and washers in so you don't lose them. Step 3 is to remove the large bolt forward of the trigger unit using a 13mm spanner. This bolt runs down through a slot in the centre of the anti-bear trap device. Don't forget the little washer below it now. Step 4 is to remove the retaining pins which hold in the trigger unit using a parallel punch and a hammer. Now I've set the end of the cylinder up on top of a block of timber so that there's freedom below the rifle for the pins to pop out. Once removed, the trigger unit should easily come out. Don't forget the safety catch now, and be careful, there's a small spring at the end of it. You need to make sure you remove it, otherwise you could lose it by accident. Step 5 is to unscrew the trigger block, which can be fairly stiff on a brand new rifle, so if you can, you're best locking it into a vise to hold the rifle steady. Now the instructions suggest it using either a steel or brass block slid into the trigger housing slot to give you enough mechanical leverage to unscrew the block. I didn't have this, so I used a piece of hardwood timber which done the job rightly, but I've also heard of people using a large end spanner slid into the block sideways to the same effect. Once you have it loose, you can start to unscrew the block, but be careful. Don't unscrew it all the way, it's still under spring compression. You need to stop 3 or 4 threads from the end, otherwise you'll send the whole thing flying across the bench in a bang. Once you've got to this stage, place the rifle muzzle down onto the ground, using an old rag to cushion it. Place your weight onto the end of the trigger block and unscrew the rifle the last 3 or 4 threads. Once you feel that the block is fully unscrewed from the rifle, you can slowly release the pressure from the spring. There usually isn't a lot of pressure in these guns, but it's enough to damage the last thread or two if you don't release it gently. Step 6 is to tap out the pivot pin near the breech and remove the cocking lever, complete with the linkage, and lift off the anti-bear trap. To do that, I once again set the rifle up on a couple of pieces of timber so that there's freedom below it for the pin to travel out through once I tapped it out with a parallel punch and a hammer. Then you can easily remove the cocking lever, the linkage, and the anti-bear trap device. This leads us to step 7, which is to remove all internal components, including the main spring with the spring guide, the compression chamber, and the piston inside it. It's at this point I noticed something funny about the main spring, and I had a closer look. You can see here that the spring is actually snapped about 1.5 coils from the end, So this is obviously where the power loss has been coming from. I have fired thousands of rounds through this rifle, but I would have thought the mainspring would have lasted longer than this, as I have been careful not to ever fire the rifle without a pellet in it. Well, that's everything stripped down and its main components ready for degreasing. So in part 2 we'll be following on with the instructions on how to prepare the components for the rebuild, then reinstalling them into the rifle and putting everything back together again. Then we'll be firing a few shots over the chronograph to see how much of a change it's made. So stay tuned for part 2, the rebuild.